Today I'm going to show you how to make this delicious sourdough sandwich bread all in one day. Today we are going to be making sourdough sandwich bread, same day sourdough sandwich bread. The entire process, including all the rise time and bake time, will take about 8 hours. So you need to start in the morning if you want to have bread for that evening. Actually, you might start the night before, and that is when you will take your sourdough starter out of the refrigerator. I keep mine in the refrigerator because I don't make sourdough every day and I don't want to have to feed my starter constantly, so I keep it in the refrigerator. And what I do is the day before I'm going to make bread, I take it out and sit it on the counter, and this way it comes to room temperature and starts to get a little active. Then first thing in the morning, early in the morning, I will feed it, and by the time it has doubled in size, by the time I get ready for my morning and my day to begin, it should have doubled in size. And this is my starter that I fed this morning. I started out with about this much starter, and then I fed it, and so I had about this much, and now it has more than doubled in size, and you can see it is nice and bubbly. It is a beautiful starter, and that's what you want to start with. You want a very active, happy starter to begin with. Now, if you need to make your starter or you want more information on your starter, I have a video, and I'll put a card right here that I will show you how to make a starter if you don't have one. And I think in that video I also explained that I keep mine in the refrigerator until I am ready to use it, because there's no need in just feeding and discarding and feeding and discarding if you're not going to make sourdough every day. So let's go over the ingredients that we'll need. First, you're going to want a good size bowl. Now this recipe is going to make 1 loaf, and you're going to want a good size bowl that can hold your dough while it's rising. And I have here 3/4 of a cup of milk, which I have added, so it's part milk and it's part kefir whey, because I don't have any buttermilk. But if you have buttermilk, that's great. If you don't have any kefir, you can use yogurt. Just put a little yogurt in with your milk and stir it up. You just some kind of a fermented milk, buttermilk, yogurt, kefir, whatever you prefer, just helps the bread to rise and helps to make everything more active. Now, when I say buttermilk, this would not be a good time to use the buttermilk substitute where you take lemon juice and add it to regular milk and it curdles and makes buttermilk, because it's not the buttermilk flavor that we're after, but rather the cultures that are in the buttermilk. So if you don't have buttermilk, you don't have yogurt, and you don't have kefir, just use regular milk. This is just an added boost. It's not absolutely necessary. So you could just use milk, but I just want to let you know what I have here is a little milk and a little kefir whey, because I want to give that added boost to my sourdough. I also have here not quite a 1/2 cup of sugar. You can use as little as 2 tablespoons of sugar or as much sugar as you want. Now, my family does not absolutely love the sourness of sourdough, so I go a little heavy on the sugar because I like the sweetness that it gives the bread too. But so you need somewhere between 2 tablespoons up toward a 1/2 cup of sugar, and I have here just under a 1/2 cup of sugar. And then here I have 1.5 teaspoons of pink Himalayan salt. You can use any kind of salt you want to use. You're just going to need 1.5 teaspoons. And here I have 2 tablespoons of oil, vegetable oil. You can use olive oil, whatever kind of oil you want to use. And you can also use butter if you want to use butter. But I just use oil. It's just easier and a little bit more economical. And then here I have about 3.5 cups of bread flour. I'm probably only going to need 3 cups. When you're making sourdough, it's very difficult to judge the exact amount of flour that you are going to need, because everyone's starter is a little different. Some are more liquidy, some are thicker, and you may use a different amount of starter, and that is going to affect how much flour you need. So you're going to Once your starter is room temperature and ready to feed, we're actually making a pre-ferment, but a pre-ferment and feeding a starter is practically the same thing. We're just going to do it in a little bit larger amount. So I want to have 1.5 to 2 cups of starter to use in this recipe. So I used, probably about 3/4 of a cup of starter and a cup of flour and a cup of water to feed my starter. So I would make sure I had enough starter, enough pre-ferment. Hopefully that's not confusing. The pre-ferment is really just a fed starter, is what our pre-ferment is your fed starter that has at least doubled in size. And this only took a little over an hour to, it's actually been like at this level for quite a while. So you want to make sure it's rising quickly and it's a very happy, healthy starter. That way you will have a good turnout in your bread. So the next thing you want to do once you get your starter is ready, your pre-ferment, I keep calling it starter and I should be calling it your pre-ferment. Once your pre-ferment is ready, then you're going to mix everything together. And I'm going to use this measuring cup, so I'm going to go ahead and pour my 3/4 cup of milk and whey or buttermilk, whatever you're using, into my bowl. Then I'm going to use this cup to measure myself out approximately 1.5 to 2 cups of starter, and it does not have to be an exact amount. You just want about that much. Now the first thing you're going to do is you're going to stir this starter down, okay? And that's why I say 1.5 to 2 cups, because when you stir this starter down, you really don't know where it's going to land. It really depends on how much air bubbles it has in it. So I'm going to pour this just so I'll know how much I've got. I'm going to put this into my measuring cup. And I have about a cup. It's about 1.5 cups. Yeah, about 1.5 cups of starter. About 1.5 cups of pre-ferment is what I've ended up with once I stirred it down so that it wasn't all puffed up. So I'm going to pour that into my milk. Also, I want to note that when I fed my starter to make my pre-ferment, I also set my milk out here on the counter so that it would be coming to room temperature. You don't want anything to be cold that you put into this if you're planning on making it the same day, because that is really going to slow it down. So you want everything to be warm and room temperature. You don't want anything to be cold. Now it'll just take a minute, and you want to stir the pre-ferment and the milk together. Now if you are using butter instead of oil, you are going to want to melt that butter. You don't want to put it hot into your pre-ferment, because you don't want to kill the bacteria, but you are going to want to melt it so that you can stir it in. So once you have your milk and your pre-ferment stirred together so it's just very thin, we are going to go ahead and add our oil, and yes, our salt, and our sugar. We're going to stir this all together. And I have here my dough whisk, which is a great tool if you don't have one and you like to make bread. You might want to get yourself one. And you can check out my webpage that has a complete list of all my things I love to get from Amazon. So now we are going to mix in our flour. I'm not going to put it all. I am going to start out with about half, just to make it easy to mix, and I'm going to mix that together. Now I'm going to put all the rest except about 1/2 cup. And I'm just guessing at it. And I just use the dough whisk until it gets too thick, and then I start using my hands. And I'm going to use the spatula and scrape everything down off of the sides. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to squeeze this dough. I'm going to take my hand and I'm just going to squeeze it. Just, you know, try to get underneath the bottom. And I'm just going to squeeze the dough until it comes together. And if it seems extremely dry, you're going to want to add some more milk. And like I said, it's just not an exact science because of the nature of the pre-ferment and the starter. And I am going to add a little bit of milk to this. So I'm going to start with probably approximately a tablespoon of milk. I'm going to add that. You don't want an extremely dry dough. You actually want it to be a little bit sticky. Going to add another tablespoon of milk. And yes, I know this milk was cold and it would have been better if I had warmed it up, but I think since everything else is good and warm that I'm going to be okay. So now I just continue to squeeze until this incorporates together and we can call it mixed. I'm going to add just a little more flour since I got too much milk. This is how it is when you're baking, guys. Sometimes you have to add liquid, sometimes you have to add flour. Okay, now it's getting the consistency I like. It's a sticky dough, but it's not liquidy. Hopefully you can see this and see just how it is. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean my hand off here. Now I am just going to set this aside for 30 minutes. And this is going to be what we call the autolyze stage. So that's going to give the flour time to absorb the liquid. And you will notice when I come back in 30 minutes how soft this will be and how the flour has absorbed all of that liquid. So I have a wet towel, a little cotton towel here that I have wet, and I'm just going to cover the dough to autolyze with that, and I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes and then I'll come back. Our dough mixture has been sitting for 30 minutes and we are ready for the next step. That 30 minutes was not for the dough to rise, but rather for it to autolyze. So you won't notice that it's really grown that much, and that's okay. This dough is going to have 3 rises. Normally when you make bread there are 2 rises. The first rise, and then you punch it down and shape it and put it in your pan, and then it'll have a second rise. But this dough, we're going to let it rise 2 times. And so your dough is probably pretty sticky, so depending on how sticky or dry your dough is, you can use flour or you can use water. But what we're going to do basically, and we don't have to make this difficult. There are videos out there that will teach you how to stretch and fold, and everybody does it different. But let me tell you, the main thing is that we are getting in here and we are moving this dough around and stretching it in some form. And if it sticks to your hands, try not to let that bother you. Just continue. So I just kind of get the dough loose from the bowl and then just pull it up and pull it over. And we're just going to do this for, really, there's no exact time. You can do it for 5 minutes, you can do it for 10 minutes, whatever you want to do. Basically, we are just going to stretch and pull on this dough to help it develop gluten. And this is a form of kneading. Now, if we were really kneading the dough, we would put it out here on our counter and we would knead the dough. And you can definitely do that if that's something that you want to do. But I usually just squeeze the dough and stretch the dough in the bowl. I mean, we're pretty much just whatever you want to do. You can squeeze it, you can stretch it, you can knead it, whatever you want to do. And just, you don't have to put a time limit on yourself. So I like to do this. Now it does take a little bit of strength, and that's another thing. Depending on your arm strength and your hand strength, if you don't have the strength to do that, just do a little stretching like this, and that's all it takes. And just do that for about 5 minutes, and that will be all you need to do to this dough to get it stretched. But my favorite thing to do is I just pull it up toward me, so I have it kind of balled up, and I just pull my hand toward me and back, and just do this. And that's a good way to knead the dough. And then I'll turn my bowl and continue doing that. But I'm going to show you, once I get done with this, I'm going to show you what I do to help my dough to rise. You know you have a good dough when it starts collecting and pulling all that flour and stuff from the side of your bowl. That's always a very good sign. That's all the kneading, stretching, whatever you want to call it, that I'm going to do this time. And now let me show you how I set my dough up to rise. Okay, so now what I have here is a seed mat. This is a heating mat. It's made for germinating seeds. And I am going to use it to make a little humidity proofing oven, I guess you would call it, for my dough. And so in here I have a cooling rack, because I don't want my bowl to sit directly on the mat. So I have the mat plugged up. I'm going to set my cooling rack here. I'm going to take my bowl of dough and sit it on top of the rack. I'm going to take this very damp cotton tea towel that I have here and put it over top of my bowl. Then I'm going to take this large pan. This is just a bus pan. I think I bought this at Sam's. It's a very large pan. I only use it for food. It's very clean. And I'm just going to set this upside down over top of the heat mat, the rack, and the bowl. And what's going to happen is that's going to create a nice, humid, warm environment to help this dough rise. Now, I want to let this dough come to almost double in size. It doesn't have to completely double. And the first time it takes longer. This first rise is going to take longer than the subsequent rises. So I'm going to set myself a timer for 2 hours. I know it's going to take at least 2 hours. So I'm going to set a timer for 2 hours. When that goes off, I'll come back and check it if I think it's not rising, because it's different each time how fast it rises. And if it has doubled or almost doubled in size, then I will go ahead and go to the next step. I want to show you one more thing that I do. So you're going to want to get yourself some kind of a cylinder shaped glass or container. And this is a little measuring cup that I have. And what you're going to do is you're going to put, sorry, I forgot to do this before, but that's okay. You're going to take off a chunk of dough out of your dough ball. And we're going to put it down in our cylinder-like container and kind of get it flattened out as much as you can. You want to get it flattened out here so that it's kind of even. And since this is a measuring cup, then it tells me that that measures at Approximately 2 tablespoons. It's not exactly, but it's approximately. And I'm going to sit this right beside, I know you can't see that. Let me change that. Move that over here so you can see. So I'm going to sit this right beside of my bowl and cover it also with the wet towel. Okay. Then put invert my pan here. And that gives me a way, when I look at it, I know where it's at. And if you don't have if your container it doesn't have marks on it, then you can mark it with a marker on the outside so you know where it started. That'll help me to know if it's truly doubled in size, because it's hard to look at a ball of dough in a bowl to know if it's how much it really has risen. And this gives you a clear indication. And we will still use that dough. We'll add that dough back in. It's just temporarily there so we can measure if the dough is rising or not. So let's set a timer for 2 hours. And in 2 hours, we'll come back and see what we've got going on. It has been 3 hours since we first put our dough in here to rise. And so we are going to do our first session. And as I don't know if you can tell or not, but so this has, it's probably 1.5 times the size. It's probably 1.5 times the size that it was, and that is just fine. Now I'm going to try to get this out, add it back to my dough. I have my flour here. So all I'm going to do is similar to what I did before. First I'm going to loosen it from the sides of the bowl. And just stretch it up, plop it back. Stretch it up, put it back. And just turn my bowl as I go around. And you can tell the dough has a lot more stretch now than it did. And that's all we're going to do. Let me get my little sample piece out here. Put back in my cylinder. This just helps me gauge how much it's rising. I'm going to cover it back up with my towel. I'm going to wet this again. Now I'm going to set a timer again for 2 hours, and then we'll come back. So this is our second rise. So our dough has been on its second rise for 2 hours. And we are now going to knead it one more time and shape it and put it into our pan. So I have cleaned my surface so that I can just dump the dough right out onto my surface. And this is the part that people love to see when you're making bread, and they call this punching down the dough. So if you want to punch down the dough, you can do that. You don't have to do it like that though. So I am going to put down a little flour. Then I'm going to dump this out onto the counter. Oh, it smells so good. And I'm going to go ahead and get this little piece out. I'm just going to flour up my hands and put some flour on my surface. You don't want to use too much flour because we don't want our dough to get dry. And so I'm just going to fold it over on itself a few times. Punch out all those big air bubbles, because we don't want big holes in our sandwich bread. Okay, so we have all the air bubbles hopefully popped out of our dough, and I'm just kind of shaping it into a ball here. Now, we are just going to let that rest right there. This is called a bench rest, and we are going to let this rest for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and shape it and put it in our pan. Our 10-minute bench rest is completed, and we are ready to shape our dough to go into our pan. And this is a non-stick pan, but I still oiled it. So I'm just going to lightly shape this dough into some kind of a rectangle. Then I'm just going to fold this corner over, fold that corner over, and this corner over. Now I'm going to roll it up. If you see any big bubbles, you're going to want to pop those, because those will end up just being holes in your bread. And I'm just kind of tucking this over. You just want to make sure you don't have any big open seams. And we are going to pop this into our pan. Once again, I'm still popping any big air bubbles that I see. So here's what it looks like in the pan. We're going to put it back into our little humid environment that we created, our proofing box, we can call it. I'm going to cover it with the wet towel. Now this is the final rise before we bake. And we are going to let it rise for a couple of more hours. It may take 2, it may take 3, but we are going to let that rise, and then we will be baking our bread. Our bread has been rising for about 2 hours, and we are ready to put it in the oven. So here is what it looks like. Some people score their bread before they put it in the oven, but I don't usually. I just put it in just like this. I do have the oven preheated to 375 degrees. It's going to take about 40 minutes for this bread to bake, and at about 35 minutes I'll probably take the internal temperature with my thermometer. So I just have a grill thermometer here that I use, and I will be taking the internal temperature, and you want your bread to be at 190 to 200 degrees on the inside. So at about 35 minutes I'll take its temperature and decide how much longer I need to use. The bread has been in the oven for 40 minutes. I have taken the internal temperature, and it is ready to come out of the oven. So I'm going to brush the top with butter. If you're making sandwiches, you usually want the crust to be soft. I'm going to take it out of the pan. It smells delicious. I'm going to brush some on the sides. And I know I'm making a mess, but I can wipe that up. So now we are going to let our bread cool, and then we'll slice into it and see what the crumb looks like. Make sure you let your bread cool at least about 30 minutes to an hour before you slice into it. And the reason is, if you slice into the bread when it's hot, then the inside can become gummy and it just changes the texture of the bread. And this bread is pretty cool. It's a little warm, but it's not hot. And we're going to go ahead and slice into it. And we have a beautiful texture. It is so soft. Then we're going to have a taste test. That is so delicious. If you are enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing to my channel, share the video, and boop that like button. God bless. Bye-bye.